Afternoon all, I thought we could continue our look at the evolution of style by looking at the rise of Max Euwe. So, when was Max Euwe seen as a great challenger for Alexander Alekhine? Well, in Zurich 1934, this was one of Euwe's early great achievements. He finished second, behind only the world champion Alexander Alekhine, and he defeated Alekhine in their game. So how did that go? How on earth could he defeat Alekhine when Alekhine was apparently in an 8-year stretch from 1927 to 35? Apparently, according to Wiki, he only lost 6 games in tournament play. So let's have a look at this 1934 game. Max Euwe playing white plays c4, the English opening. We have e6, now d4, d5, knight c3, and now a6. Curious move, looking move, a6. Although black is interested at some point in taking and maybe b5. C takes d5, e takes d5. Okay, and white develops another piece. It's a semi-closed position. Piece development isn't so critical. A6 could be useful. Sometimes in this kind of era of chess, it's also played as white in many games, a3. You see it played in certain systems as white. Okay. Black plays now knight f6. Not really worried now about this pin. After all, the bishop's committed to their Ng c7. What might be a concern is c-file pressure later against c7. Pardon me. Okay. e3, and now actually a challenge to the dark square bishop, which might be a little controversial later, because in exchanging the dark square bishops, white's usage of c5 and e5 might become more effective. So actually, Max didn't play a move like bishop g3, he actually just took on d6. Now queen takes d6, and now bishop d3. I think white has emerged with a solid position, without a kind of bishop stuck behind his own pawn chain. Potential use can be made of c5. With the pawn on a6, you could imagine a knight on c5 might be more difficult to evict with b6 if a6 is actually a liability. Something to bear in mind anyway. Knight c6 actually is played now, which shows that maybe knight e7 to g6 could be useful later. You'll note also that with the queen on d6, with a6, knight b5 is prevented. So it does have some purposes already, but there's a little bit of a downside. Knight ge2, and now black castles. And now white returns the queenside little pawn move with a3. Okay. Knight e7, knight is shifting to g6 at some point. Queen c2, putting a little bit of pressure both on h7 and also potentially on the c file. b6. So does the bishop belong on b7, or is the idea to play later c5? Well, the latter seems to be discouraged now with b4 from white. Okay. In this position, bishop b7 is played. White castles, and now rook fe8. So Alexander's going to put more and more pressure on that e4 square. Once he moves the knight, he's got a lot of pieces bearing down on e4. Knight g3, knight g6. And also, of course, without a knight on f3, it looks as though knight h4 carries potentially dangerous threats. Rook fc1, and in fact this is committed to. Knight h4 is played here. No immediate tactical implication here. Okay, knight ce7, a concrete threat of winning a pawn here, is parried now with c6. So you might think, does c6 carry any downsides to it? Can white carry out a classic minority attack? If he plays like this, knight with b5, could he aim to isolate or damage black's pawn structure? Or could there be an alternative plan? Rook ab1 is played. After rook e7, we see, okay, black is not only defending potentially c7 as an infiltration, but also potentially attacking with doubling the rooks and maybe sacking on e3 or something at some point. The queen is looking at this square, this one's looking at this square. It looks like a preparation for some sort of tactical combination with this knight kind of goal hanging on h4 at the moment. Okay, but white is not too terrified about any potential threats. He plays a4. Now rook AE8, doubling rooks. It looks neat and tidy, black's position. But this queenside issue, is it really going to be something with b5 here? Or is it going to be something else? In fact, white plays a5 here, undermining black's control of the c5 square. And also fixing down a6 potentially. If we look at this position, how effective was the move b5 in this position? a5 is actually given as one of the strongest moves here. Ideally, knight f4 and a5. If b5, that might be harmless. Just takes a5. What does white have here? No infiltration on c7. Okay, so maybe a5 is the way to play this position. It is played. It locks down, exposes c5 as a weakness potentially. b5. Okay, and now nifty move, knight f4, which prepares a rerouting potentially, knight d3 to c5 to e5 once this bishop moves. g5 can be well, that looks like weakening, especially maybe even knight h5 is possible. So I don't think this plan can be easily interrupted. Black plays actually rook c7, which looks curiously defensive on the defensive side. Queen c5, queen d7. Okay, is the queen really going to plunge into g4 at some point? Rook e1, which, okay, looks like a quiet rook move, and if white doesn't mean e4, is there any point to it? Well, there is a point to it in strengthening the position anyway, strengthening that e3 square just in case. The knight on h4 actually moves back here to g6, so immediately putting pressure on f4. But then white takes the opportunity for a forcing move, bishop f5. The queen is kicked off the diagonal. And now knight d3, that strategic operation has been carried out. So actually what we have witnessed in this game is positional play on the queen side, not a standard minority attack. Instead a lockdown on the c5 square. And now this knight is poised to either c5 or e5. Bishop c8. And that's left there, it's not captured. Rook bc1, putting the pressure on. And also, of course, the infiltration possibility of queen b6 doesn't look very pleasant for black. It would expose pressure on c6 immediately. Knight e7, asking the bishop, do something on f5. It takes on c8 now. Knight takes c8, which looks as though if black's given time, counter maneuvers might be possible. Knight e5, immediately attacking c6. It's protected. And now we see that the quiet rook behind the pawn is not so quiet here. e4 is played. Very interesting, because actually one of the dynamic advantages of the knight is not just attacking c6 but f7, and we're going to see this is quite important soon in conjunction with this e file. And also e4 not only kind of opens up potentially a rook, it also means that the queen can potentially come across if needed, if the knight wasn't defending. It's another resource introduced into the position really. Okay, so black takes on e4. After takes, we see, after d takes, that the queen has got that fifth row. And you might think, hold on a sec, if rook takes e4 here, isn't there a pin, a tactical pin with f6? Rook takes e4 was played, okay, so no queen d5, you just take and rook takes e7. So f6 looks like, well, I'm going to get rid of that knight, it's unbearable, it's hitting c6. f6 is played. Okay, so some possibilities. If knight c6, actually you can just take with the rook, you're going to win the queen. But I wonder if you can spot white's next move, which gives this game a kind of lovely mix of preparatory positional play with tactical combinations. If I give you 20 seconds here, can you spot white's next move? Well, let's make it 10 seconds because you might want to just pause the video and take longer. So 10 seconds starting from now. What did Max Euwe play here? against Alexander Alekhine. Okay, it's a bit of a brilliant move. So it makes this e4 breakthrough all make sense, really. Knight f7, it's a forcing move as well. Attacking the queen. And it seems that the king can take. If the rook takes, then rook takes e6. We can rule that out quickly. But what if the king takes? Why can't the king take? Well, let's see. If the king takes, we've got... I wonder if you can spot it. Queen h5. This is really dangerous for black. Some possibilities here. Well, if g6, I think we just take on h7, and maybe throw in another check to make sure. Now there'll be queen takes d8 there, and if king e7, there's rook takes e6 here, and then the queen's kind of loose. That's very unpleasant for black. Exchange down, lost, or even worse. So that's not possible. Now if the king goes to f8 or g8, then we lose e6. So if it goes to e7, then rook takes e6, rook e1 check, king d6, and now queen c5 check. And here, queen f5 check, king d6, queen e6 is mate. So this is a really neat move, knight f7. And apparently Alexander Alekhine took off his jacket, and I think there have been some quotations saying if the queen had been sacrificed, he'd completely undress. He took off his jacket after knight f7. It's a shocker. Okay, knight f7. Alexander Alekhine has taken off his jacket. Queen e8. Okay, how does white proceed here after queen e8? Well, it carries on in a kind of brilliant fashion, actually, this game. Rook takes e6, queen takes e6, and now a fine knight move to the 8th rank, knight d8, attacking the queen, forking e6 and c6. Queen goes to e4 now, and knight takes c6 is played. Snatch the pawn. Black now might be threatened with things like knight e7 potentially for queen takes c8, or knight takes e7, queen c7. Alexander plays h6, but we've emerged here with a dangerous passed pawn here, and it's pushed. d5, queen d3 is played. Okay, and white makes some space as well with h3. It's quite curious that as soon as black played h6, shortly after h3, and as soon as black played a6, white played a3 in this game, kind of complementing each other's pawn moves. Okay, but white is a clear pawn up here. Queen d2, and now actually Max is keen actually to improve his position. He's got a bind on Alexander, and he doesn't want to let black out of this bind. And the queen's just gone to a dark square, which signals putting the king on a light square might be useful, away from, say, queen f4 check, so the king has to go here. He wants to have the flexibility of a nice king shelter. He plays actually g3. Black's not really doing much in this position, can't do much in this position. Plays king h8, and now king g2. So that's much more cozy. It's getting more cozy. The queen goes on the light square to be able to inflict some checks. But now rook e1 takes away that queen e4 check and threatens rook e8 potentially. King h7, and now rook e3, kicking the queen. And now queen on the dark square away from any potential checks. White goes in with rook e8. Okay, and we have now queen d3. And on the offering of the exchange of queens, with queen d4 is played, the queen goes to c4. Now, not taking on c4, giving black potentially some counterplay. That pass pawn check instead. And okay, queen takes e4 is played here. If g6, it looks as though that might be too dangerous to play g6. Let's just make absolutely sure why. g6, queen e6 would be destructive. Okay, getting in on those squares. So here, the queen's taken off, and now king g8 is played. So can this white pawn make an advance here? Well, another tricky little knight move is played, attacking a6 pawn. Alexander plays king f7, letting a6 go, so he's 2 pawns down temporarily, but he's counter-attacking on d5 now. That's protected. And now we see knight e7. So is he going to win a pawn back? Well, something amazing is about to occur. d6, knight f5. Now rook d5 hitting f5 and also the pawn on b5. So it looks fairly forced to play knight takes d6. But it's going into an unfortunate pin now. Now knight c5, and we have of course a passed a pawn to deal with. So he swapped the passed d pawn for the a pawn. Rook d8, and now used as the pin with knight e4. White would have a clearly winning king and pawn ending if something like king e7, just swap off, get the king in. It's outside protected past pawn time. It's a lost position here actually for black now. He plays knight b7, and this allows a neat little finishing move. I wonder if you can spot it. A very neat little finishing move. I give you 10 seconds starting from now. What does white play here? Plays a6. Beautiful little move. So if rook takes d5, there's a takes, and black is compelled to play rook d8 to stop the pawn queening, and here would come knight d6 check. So the king moves, you play knight c8, just queening. Okay, so that's pretty neat stuff all the way through in this game actually. King e6 was played here, and now just rook takes d8, and the pawn's queening anyway. I thought that was a very neat game, very concise strategically, positionally, tactically, combination at the right time, breakthrough with e4 at the right time, exposing slight weaknesses in black's position. A great game. So Max Euwe, this defeat should have been cautionary to Alexander Alekhine for their upcoming World Championship match. It shows in many respects Max Euwe was to become a worthy world champion. He is a very capable player, very capable. Just even from this one game example, it shows all round, great chess ability and flexibility, combinative ability, and breaking open the position with e4 at the right time to expose some weaknesses in black's camp, tying down black to weaknesses, passivity, not giving black much counterplay, the e4 strike, seemingly crazy in many respects, leaving the knight pinned now to f6, the tactical f6. So did black have better here? In fact, okay, let's just get an engine evaluation of this position. Knight e7, of course the engines see all the tactics. f3 to support, or rook c1 would give quite a small advantage. So f6 was a kind of blunder here because of knight f7, which the engine sees immediately. Knight f7, top Houdini move there, getting the advantage. We have a lot of the game continuation there. We see knight d6, knight d8 rather. So f6. Okay, more prudent knight e7. Okay, so Alekhine blundered there. But anyway, it's a neat little move. Very difficult to spot this kind of move because this queen didn't have access, to h5 before. Making use of it here in this combination is beautiful if it was accepted with king takes f7. So the queen going to e8, leading to a pawn loss. Now the king being made a bit cozy on the light squares, away from all the checks. Then going in again, getting the queens off, then winning another pawn, swapping d pawn for a pawn, and then a little finishing combination. Is masterful stuff. Wonderful stuff. And rook takes the end of game. So Max Euwe, there's a lot of good information on Wiki for what happened later. In later years, he was actually became FIDE president as well. So with such a player on the cards to challenge Alexander Alekhine for the World Championship, the interest in chess in the Netherlands, well, as evident today, I wouldn't have started the YouTube channel if it wasn't for Nge2, who's from the Netherlands. They've had many grandmasters in modern day. Some of them disappeared for a bit, like Jerome Piquet. I think he went to work for Oostrum, that was the rumour. Now Oostrum, a Dutch billionaire, was sponsoring some major tournaments each year for the super grandmasters, Amber Blindfold and stuff. Brilliant tournaments. So interest in chess, if you go to the Netherlands, like they've got chess monuments around the place. It's very interesting. Over memorial today. But anyway, let's get on with it. So let's get into this challenge match in later videos for this Evolution of Style series. I hope you enjoyed this one. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.